head to Nigeria now from Berlin. My colleague Blessed Soga is joining us from there because there is an election petition there. And Blessed is there to monitor events today. Blessed, what has been happening in Nigeria?
Benes, if you can hear me, good afternoon from Nigeria. And we have been attempting to follow closely what is believed to be a very controversial elections that took place here in Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria. And the challenge, of course, as part of the outcomes of that election is that you have two opposition political parties, namely the Labour Party as well as the PDP, heading to court to challenge the elections of the incumbent president, president-elect, I should say, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, whose party, by the way, is incumbent, I wanted to say. And as part of the processes, the political parties have been making their arguments in court. Today has been the turn of the Labour Party. And the Labour Party, as you know, is a breakaway from the PDP simply because they have their front runner one time serving as the vice presidential candidate to Atiku Abubakar. They are making a case to the court to possibly ask for a rerun of the elections. And aside the issues of a rerun of the election, they believe that the president-elect should not be sworn in because basically he has not met the constitutional requirements that ought to make him president. So it's been playing out in court. Last week, they were here in court. And for those who are not aware of how the Nigerian process runs, what happens is that they do not have their case being called at once in the apex court, which would be the Supreme Court in our case in Ghana. What they have is an appellate system where an appeal is first of all filed, where the court has a maximum of about 100 days or more to make a decision on whether or not their concerns on the presidential election is indeed valid. That's why they call it the Presidential Tribunal. So that's what's been happening today for the Labour Party. So the Labour Party was in court raising a number of concerns about the process itself and challenging the eligibility of the president-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu. But there was a lot of drama today, something that many were not expecting as part of the process. It started off with the courts challenging or indicating that it will not recognize, for instance, the chairpersons of the party. Because first of all, the chairpersons of the party are even fighting amongst themselves, and the party and the court believes that the only person to recognize in this very case will be the leader of the Labour Party who stood for the presidential race in the person of Peter Obi. Peter Obi, as we know him, is arguably the third force now, and when it comes to Nigeria's presidential election. So he's been making the case to the court that ought to be a rerun, there ought to be some change in the declaration that was made by the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria. So that's what's played out in court. And we're also getting to see for the very first time that Peter Obi is not necessarily having a smooth ride as it would be, as some of his party members are beginning to draw factions from amongst themselves. And as I was pointing out earlier, the chairperson, for instance, one person holding himself out as the chairperson of the party and another person also emerging, which is then creating a faction even within the Labour Party here in Abuja. So that also played out. And beyond that as well, we know that the court is set to hear the case of the PDP. So unlike the Ghanaian case where you have both parties and stakeholders filing their responses to the Supreme Court, you don't have that happening in Nigeria. So the political parties, the opposition political parties, are running that separately. So they are hearing the arguments of the Labour Party. They are hearing the arguments of those who are saying the president-elect should not be sworn in because there are just a few more days for that window to expire because he's set to be sworn in by the 29th of May. So that's the very closest window they have in terms of this week and probably the early parts of next week to stop that. So PDP will be in court tomorrow. And already I've been interacting with some of the leading figures of PDP. I was just speaking to the spokesperson for the Atiku Abubakar campaign, who also ran for one of the governor race in Nigeria. I was pointing out to us that they wouldn't want Ghana, for instance, to even recognize what's happening as far as the outcome of the election is concerned. They want, for instance, President Akufo-Addo, in the event that he's invited to grace the occasion of the swearing in, they want him to boycott that process. They also want other West African countries, other African nations, not to attend the swearing in of Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So that's been the argument they are also making on the sidelines as part of their diplomatic moves to try as much as possible to get the regional body ECOWAS and ECOWAS leaders to come in and sort of peer review what's happening to the Nigerian democratic process. The belief is that if the likes of President Akufo-Addo and other African leaders attend the swearing in, and we have the courts of Nigeria overturning the ruling, it will be a big conflict for in terms of recognition and diplomatic wise for these West African nations. So the spokesperson will also be making a case, as we'll be showing to you in the coming days, the issue about extremism, the need for democratic stability within the West Africa sub-region. Because mind you, Nigeria is one of the very few of the countries, just like Ghana, holding on to democratic tendencies within the West Africa sub-region. It's the reason for which they believe that the court needs to act fast and to intervene in what's happening when it comes to the Nigerian democratic process.
Right, Blessed, I'm just curious what the mood is like for many Nigerians. We know how it was in the build-up to the elections. There were notable personalities who used social media as a tool to even encourage Nigerians to go for their cards to vote, because there appeared to be a lot of apathy, and we saw that translate even in the numbers at the end of the day. But what is the general sense or general reaction to this case in court?
I've been engaging some voters, both floating voters and those who side with the opposition side. So generally, you get the argument from the opposition side that indeed, even if we're to say that Atiku Abubakar did not win the elections and we did not have Peter Obi win the elections, they doubt if the president-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu indeed won the elections. That's the argument. So even if you call for a rerun, I'm sure that the opposition political parties here in Nigeria will be okay with that process, because at least it will bring finality to what's happening. In terms of the main voters, the main voter population is, first of all, concerned about the process. Mind you, this is Nigeria. You're dealing with a population of over 200 million, and the voter population is as big as the Ghanaian population and even more. That's the situation you're dealing with. So the numbers are quite huge. I was just talking to one voter who shared his experience with me, indicating to me that when he joined the queue on the day of the elections, it appears that that process ran even into the next day. And that's how tedious the Nigerian election can be. Getting the PVC, the permanent voter card, which we will call the voter ID card in Ghana, is a big deal. It doesn't come easily. So going through the process again and having the courts ask for a rerun will be indeed a challenge, because there'll obviously be the concern about the turnout as to whether or not citizens themselves will want to participate in that process again. So that's another leg of the conversation, but you'd want to look at democratic stability, the fact that you'd want to appease all stakeholders involved in this. And these are some of the issues that I'm sure that the court will be paying attention to. Don't forget that when you talk about the Nigerian process in terms of how their makeup is, there's a constitutional requirement of how you can be declared winner. So they do not have, for instance, they do not have the case where if you have your 50% plus one, then you are passed for the entire process. At least, for instance, say in an area such as Abuja, you're supposed to get at least some 25% of the vote, get it evenly spread across all the states in Nigeria. That's the constitutional requirement. So it's not a simple majority as we have in our case in Ghana, and that has been a major factor in terms of what's happening here in Nigeria. We're looking forward to tomorrow's proceedings involving the PDP. I'm sure that definitely we'll have the opportunity to interact with some of the leading figures if we do get why he believes this process has been fraught with some challenges.
Right, just for purposes of clarity, before you leave us, Blazer, this case that's going to be heard tomorrow, you just mentioned about that. Is it being heard separately from the Peter Obi case, or this is one case that is being looked at and then they have different turns to make their arguments?
Right. So the arrangement they have is a presidential tribunal. At least that's the impression I get. I start to be educated more on the matter, but that's the impression I get, that this is a presidential tribunal. It's a constitutional process that has been laid down, which Nigeria is almost used to. So I was speaking to the spokesperson of the Atiku campaign, who indicated to me, for instance, that this is not the first time they are going through such a process, except for Jonathan, Goodluck Jonathan, who in some time past decided not to challenge the presidential election. So Nigeria is quite used to the process where their results are challenged, sort of. You have almost in every election the outcome challenged in the courts. What they have not had in their history is the situation where you have the court saying that the candidate-elect or the presidential candidate-elect has to go for a rerun. That has never happened in the history of Nigeria. And this is how close the country is getting to possibly that situation where the democratic tendencies of Africa's most populous nation is being tested. Mind you, Nigeria matters to the South region, matters to West Africa, and whatever is happening here has some sort of bearing on development in Ghana and other West African nations. So it's the reason for which people are watching, and experts are watching this closely, to see what the court will decide. There's another leg or strata, if you want to put it, to the process. The next process will be to use the Supreme Court. And that's how unique the Nigerian process is. So you have the appellate system, which happens or runs within less than 200 days, but within a 100-day space. When that process is exhausted and you're not satisfied with the outcome, you're then having the opportunity now to proceed to the apex court, which is the Supreme Court, to make another argument. At that point, the case will be heard within a limited time, much more shorter than the 100 days plus requirement that we have for what's happening now. But this process is interesting because, mind you, there's one party in court asking for the inauguration to be halted. We have one party asking for a rerun. We have also the PDP coming through to say, well, even if we're not the ones who won the elections, there must be a rerun because the constitutional requirements have not been met. So that's the challenge. And on a lighter note, I was just passing by the Eagle Square in Abuja a couple of minutes ago, and it looks quite ready for Tinubu. As to whether or not that exercise will happen is something we need to wait for.
Right, Blessed Soga there joining us from Abuja, Nigeria. He's with the Foreign Affairs Desk, and if you know by now, he runs a show or hosts a show which looks at foreign affairs matters. But today, he's joining us from Nigeria, where he's been monitoring events with regards to that case in court, looking forward to having the elections held in Nigeria earlier this year annulled, basically, because we know that Peter Obi's party is asking for a rerun. He will still be in Nigeria a while longer and bring us updates on that. So you want to stay with us. JoyNews, this is your election headquarters. We'll take a quick breather now. When we come back, we'll be talking about electricity tariff increments. You want to stay for that.